George. So let me introduce Mr. Khan. Mr. Khan, and I thank you so much for your patience. I think you are quite aware of how these things work. So at this time, we have Mr. Michael Khan, and he's from Trinidad Systems Limited, and he's here to present to our students. Mr. Khan, we invite you and thank you so much for cooperating with us.
Thank you very much, Ms. George, and good afternoon to everybody. So I'm going to share my screen in a minute. Before I do, I just want to, I guess, share with you all some of the pros and cons of presenting third in the lineup for the day. The pros are, of course, that I get to reference some of the information that my colleagues presented before me. The cons are that they're in my slides, and it's going to look as though I plagiarized some of it. But I want to guarantee you that while you might see the information being repeated a little bit, that I hope to offer you a slightly different perspective on how that information is presented. So I'm going to share my screen, and you should be able to see my screen now. So we have about 20 minutes, I think, and I'm going to try and get through it with enough time at the end to answer some questions for you. The difference that you're going to see in my presentation versus what some of the other folks have presented today, being Sanjeev and Keston, or at least those are the two that I've seen, is I want to present why choose a career in IT from the perspective of someone who works for an IT company. What you will find is that my path to where I am today, which is near 30 years in the making at this point, is not necessarily the traditional path. And I hope that it gives those of you out there not sure where you're going to end up or where you would like to be, the comfort that there are prescribed paths to get the job of your dreams, and that's great. But there are also, the paths that are less traveled. And at your age, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to not have, the world figured out, as I hope you'll see in my presentation, right? So as Ms. George mentioned, my name is Michael Khan. I'm the Vice President of Sales for the Trinidad Systems Limited group of companies. One of the things I thought would be important so that you can kind of appreciate the path that I took is share with you a bit about my education, a bit about my first job, and some of the things that got me to this point. So I do have a Bachelor of Commerce in Management with an e-business minor, which I received from Ryerson University of Canada back in 2005. So that was a little while ago. I also have a postgraduate diploma from the Australian Institute of Business. And I also have several certificates in a wide range of skills, both technical and non-technical. For example, I'm a NEBOSH certified oil and gas safety technician. And in a minute, you'll understand why somebody in a technical role would have a safety certification. So my first job ever, and this is right out of what we used to call O-levels, I think it's called CSEC now, was in 1995 as a web designer for a company called Interserve Limited. That company no longer exists, but they were one of the first internet service providers in the country. At that point in time in 1995, the internet was still a pretty new thing. And a lot of the jobs that were in that industry didn't necessarily have schools that you could go to learn the necessary skills. So I was actually self-taught as a web designer and graphic designer. Back then, we coded in HTML, where there are a lot more coding methodologies available now. As a matter of fact, nowadays, there's what you call zero code, where you don't actually need to know any coding language to develop a website. It speaks to the fact that I think Keston, just at the end of his last session, mentioned that there's a generation of self-taught. Well, we didn't have YouTube in 1995, and I would like to admit that if we did, I'd probably be a better web and graphic designer back then. My path from that point in 1995 to where I am now was quite diverse and varied. In the process, I worked for companies like Amoco, which is now BP, IBM, Cable and Wireless, and a few others. As you would have probably figured out, if I did O-levels in 94 and got a job in 1995, I didn't go to any tertiary level institution. I worked for a couple of years and then I went to university in Canada. The reason for that being finances, right? That's a fact of everybody's life. You don't always have the money to do what you would like to do. There are also a lot more institutions, local institutions, that can offer a world-class degree today than they were back then, right? I think everybody has to follow their own path. Mine was just I guess a little time spent working and then education and then back into working. But since coming back to Trinidad in 2005, I've always played a bit in the field. Every couple of years I try to refresh or learn a new skill or get a new certification, and I think that will augur well for your career over the years. Because I do work for a technology company, I want to present a lot of the considerations for career path in that context. And in order to do that, I kind of want to share a bit about the company itself. So we are a group of companies. We've been in operations for over 40 years. We have 200 plus staff members across the group in 3 countries, which cover 18 markets across the region. We work with about 25 plus different solution partners, and those would be the folks like Google, Checkpoint, Cisco, Fortinet, quite a few. And these are names that if you have any kind of interest in IT, you would be familiar with. And if not, I hope that you can learn a bit more about it when you get an opportunity to. This is how we operate. As you can see, we're in quite a few countries. We are not a typical representation of a local IT company. We've been around for quite some time, and that has allowed us to grow beyond our shores. There are indigenous or local IT companies, as there are foreign companies that have set up operations in Trinidad. And again, I'm relating these things to you to kind of help you understand what jobs or what companies you might be applying to when that time comes. I also thought it important to mention to you that while we are a technology company, it doesn't mean that everybody that works under our roof is actually a technical resource. As you can see from the chart that I've put up here, we have about 137 employees in our Trinidad office. And it's almost a split right down the middle between those folks who are technical in role and those folks who are non-technical in role. And technical being, our solution designers, our software developers, our network administrators, our cybersecurity specialists. All of those are lumped into this 47% that you see on the left, and the rest of the company, being the other 52%, consists of folks in administrative roles, finance, human resources, sales and marketing, which is where I am, logistics and facilities management, right? So you can aspire to work in a technology industry without necessarily having to be a technical resource, right? So I really want people to appreciate that, you have a lot of paths to work in the technology field. So with that in mind, it begs the question, is a career in ICT for me or for you, as the case would be? This is the part where you're going to start seeing some information that you might have seen before, which I guess you can take as a bit of validation that I know what I'm talking about, as do some of the folks who presented before me. And the first thing is that careers in IT are in high demand and they offer a pretty good salary. Will you get the salary of your dreams the day after you graduate? No. But with time and experience and tenure, you can get there arguably quicker than some other fields that you might be considering, because it's in such high demand. And for any economic students in the audience today, you'll know that things that are high in demand can call a higher price. The same applies for your job. There are, excuse me, lots of options for education. I think if you all sat on the CTS or SPCS presentations earlier, you'll see that there's diversity even in their offerings. I'll talk a little bit more about that on another slide. Why that matters? Well, you know, you have a lot of different opportunities that you can follow throughout your career for that education piece. As we also saw in previous presentations, IT means that you kind of have the opportunity to work from anywhere. And when I say from anywhere, I mean you could be working for a local company from home. There's a hybrid work model that I think is very pervasive at the moment, where you might work a couple of days in the office and a couple of days from home. Or you can broaden the net there, and you could be working in Trinidad for a company in North America or Europe or Asia. These things do happen for Trinidadians. As a matter of fact, I know quite a few Trinidadians in positions of seniority in companies like Google, Microsoft, Checkpoint, IBM, and these are not people who work for local offices for those companies, but people who have really important roles and influence some of the things that you and I consume from those companies. You can't have a presentation about anything these days without referencing the pandemic. And where IT is concerned, it has accelerated what we call the digitization momentum of this digitalization or digitization. And what that means for people considering IT, well, you can't have digitization without IT, right? And that's not going to go away. That's not something that's going to roll back, right? While you might see, you know, the workplace change a little bit, people who have changed their operations to a more digital version are not going to go, well, you know what? Now that the pandemic is over, I'd prefer to get back to all the paper that we were using before, right? That's just not going to happen for a lot of reasons, including the cost effectiveness of it. We as people are more connected than ever, as are things, right? And what I mean by things, you know, you have your phone, you have your laptop, some people, you know, their TV, their radio, their fridge, their cameras. There's so many things that are more connected now. And what is happening is that critical mass requires more skills, more resources to support, develop, and innovate. And speaking of innovate, you know, IT is one of those careers. You know, I think there's a misconception about what an IT professional looks like. You know, this kind of nerdy image comes to mind, but there's a lot of creativity and innovation, especially if you're in things like development, right? The folks in the ICT world are by and large shaping the world that we live in, especially through things like machine learning and artificial intelligence, which, as you'll see in a minute, also influence the options for careers. Because the robots are coming, right? And getting into IT means that you're going to be able to future-proof your career to a certain extent, right? Yes, there are jobs which will be replaced by robots, artificial intelligence, and automations, but somebody has to develop those things. Those things are not, they don't have the ability to procreate on their own, right? They require human intervention, human management, human guidance, and those things are founded in ICT. So if you thought that your job as a taxi driver is safe, it's not, because this is real world. These things exist. These are self-driving cars. This is actually from a company called Waymo. It's I guess, an evolution of Uber in Trinidad. We have Drop, where you would get a taxi via app. Well, a taxi will show up for you, but there's no driver, and it'll get you from point to point. I think in one of the previous presentations, chatbots were referenced, and the chatbot will replace jobs like folks in customer service or even sales, where they're intelligent enough to ask a question, digest the response, and offer a logic-based path towards the solution that the human is asking for. Anybody who has ever ordered anything from Amazon, these are the equipment that fulfill your orders. I want everybody to take a look here, and you can count on one hand how many humans are in these warehouses. These little robots are capable of lifting upwards of 400 kilograms, something that a human never could. They don't need brakes. They are precise in the performance, in the delivery of their responsibilities. So there's a lot of good reason for warehouses like that at Amazon to frankly replace humans with robots. This is just a picture of one of the few humans that do work in the Amazon warehouses. And as you can see, it only takes one person to work alongside all of these robots for the fulfillment of the orders that you and I make on Amazon, right? So future-proof your careers, get into something that a robot or artificial intelligence cannot easily replace you. So I want to talk about some of the actual careers within tech, and you will see some of these roles being repeated. And what I'm trying to do here is identify whether this is something that there's a lot of growth available in, and some of the actual titles or roles you can expect to get in the early part of your career versus the later part of your career. So computer support, and by the way, almost everything you're going to see here are roles that exist in a company like TSL. Some of them we are actively looking to fill today, right? And there are a couple of companies like TSL in the country. So just to give you a kind of an idea as to what the size of the market might be. So computer support. And these include things like IT support technicians, desktop support, help desk. These are the folks that you call when you get that wheel of death on your computer where it's stuck, you can't do anything, I need help. And then when you pick up the phone to call them, they tell you, well, have you tried rebooting your computer, which is usually the first thing that they ask. And I am simplifying what is in fact a much more complex and frankly critical role for not just IT companies, but all companies, right? You will find support technicians and help desk technicians in non-IT companies because so many of the employees rely on technology to do their job. So it just makes sense to have those things in-house. So in the early part of the career, you're kind of doing the grunt work, for lack of a better term. But later on, some of the roles available would be things like senior help desk support technician, service desk supervisor, and so on. Cybersecurity is actually a high growth, high demand field of ICT right now. And that has a lot to do with the fact that everything is more connected. People are working from home, accessing very important and private documents and data that belongs to a company that you wouldn't want to get in the hands of a malicious actor. If you read the news or follow the news of late, you'll know that Trinidad is not immune to being hit by cyber threats. The most recent one that I think most of us would be aware of is what happened to Massey Stores a couple of weeks ago. I promise you there are a lot more that you don't hear about. So this is something that's not going to go away. The more things we connect to the internet and to each other, the more there will be a need for cybersecurity professionals. In the early part of a cybersecurity career, you can expect to find roles for information security analysts, cybersecurity engineers, and in the later parts of your career, senior cyber engineer, ethical hackers, and CISOs, which are chief information security officers. Networks and systems, also an important part of the whole ICT infrastructure. Without networks and systems, you won't have the medium to traverse, your emails and other electronic bits of data. But it is, in fact, a low growth area. And that's not diminishing its importance. It just means that the field is becoming saturated. It's something that a lot of people have pursued, and with things like managed services being offered by folks like TSL, Flow, Digicel, the need to have in-house network expertise is diminishing, right? In the early part of your networking career, you'll find roles like network administrator, systems administrator, network implementation technician, systems analyst. In the later part of your career, network engineer, systems engineer, network security engineer, cloud network engineer, which again is a bit more hybriding, if you will, of what's available in the workplace. And at the most senior level, you will see roles like CIO, which is Chief Information Officer. Just a couple more careers to be aware of. There's software development, which is high growth, and you will find both in the early and later parts of your career, roles like software engineer, software developer, senior software engineer. Web development, it sounds a bit counterintuitive that it would be a low growth field. And it's not low growth because fewer people demand it. It's low growth because of things like automations, artificial intelligence, low code or zero code platforms. If anybody's familiar with services like Wix or Squarespace, you don't need to be even remotely technical to build a website for yourself. So web development, while it's not going away, you will find fewer and fewer jobs available in the field simply because the technology is becoming more accessible to non-skilled individuals. Data, with digitization, it means that you have a much greater portfolio or database of information to work with. What you're seeing now as a trend is while people have all of this information in digital form, they're now using the data to make business decisions. And in order to do that, you need things like data center technicians, database admins, analysts, data scientists, engineers, and architects. And lastly, there's cloud computing, which is a bit newer in terms of careers available. You can go back a couple of decades, arguably, and cloud computing has always been around. It's been called by different names, but it is in high demand now because a lot of folks are realizing that it's more cost effective to have your infrastructure being owned and maintained by somebody else in the internet cloud. And because of that, you're going to see a lot more opportunities for careers, cloud engineers, cloud computing programmers, cloud architects, and cloud consultants are actually all roles that TSL is looking to fill at the moment as well. And what you will find, especially in the Caribbean, because we tend to be a couple of years behind the curve, that there are more jobs than there are people to fill them. So I encourage anybody who is considering something in ICT to look at cloud, because that's not going to be going anywhere. And other careers related to technology, but not quite technical, include things like project management, product manager, business analyst, sales, digital marketing, which we did touch on a little bit earlier as well. In terms of education, there are some soft skills which you should have regardless of what area of business you work in, including proactivity, problem solving, the ability to communicate effectively, critical thinking, self-organization, and time management. Consistency is key. Any employer will tell you that, and being accountable, and of course, networking. And I don't mean networking in the IT context, but build a network of mentors, a network of peers, a network of like-minded thinkers, so that you can lean on these people to forge a career path for yourself. In terms of education, and this is where I'll be mashing the corns of.
Yes, sir. I really don't mean to cut you.
Sure.
I really don't mean to cut you. But our last presenter, they will not be available after 6. So could I just ask you, sir, to wrap up in 1 minute, thanks?
Absolutely, and I can, because I think my predecessors covered most of the education piece already, right? I just want to point out, though, that if you're looking to build experience without the expertise, volunteering is a good way to get that experience, and or things like OJT, anything where the entry is not a hard wall that you need to break through. And final words for everybody, knowing where you are today, being passionate about something doesn't necessarily mean that you're skilled in it, right? Like I might be passionate about music, but I'm not a very good singer, right? Or I might be a skilled singer, but I have stage fright, and I'm not, too passionate about singing in front of people. But wherever you can merge those two things, that will be your ideal job. So for me, I had a passion for all things technology related, but you would have probably figured out just in the last 20 minutes that we've spent together that I enjoy talking, right? So being able to merge that made me a pretty effective salesperson. And from where I sit today as Vice President of Sales and Revenue Generation, it helps me relate to my customers pretty well. So that's it from me. I hope that was helpful in a practical sense. And if there's any time for questions, I will answer. Otherwise, I'll leave my information with Ms. George, and you guys can reach out to me at any point in time.
I appreciate that, Mr. Khan. You please feel free to leave the information in the chat. And I thank you so much. What I appreciated, sir, your presentation came from the aspect of working in the organization, not necessarily educational institute. So I really appreciate the levels that you would have shared. So thank you so much, Mr. Khan. And as I said,
for the opportunity.
Please leave your information in the chat.
Sure. Thank you very much. And good luck to everybody out there. I hope you take the last summer that you have before you get into some adult stuff, and hopefully we'll speak to each other at some point.
Yes. Thank you again, sir. And I don't mean, students, for this to be rushed, but at this time, we have